I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Welcome back to Genesis Does, and this week we're doing something a little bit different. We're taking a look at prototypes that are from HiddenPalace.org. If you don't know the story of Hidden Palace, it's a scrapped level from Sonic the Hedgehog 2 that shows up in a prototype version of the game and has actually been restored in some versions of the game that have come out in more recent years, but was never actually intended to be played by the public until that time. So what better name to give a website full of prototypes than to call it Hidden Palace? Seems pretty appropriate, don't you think? And we're starting this episode with Lobo, the intergalactic bounty hunter himself. You may know him well from DC Comics, but now you'll know him from this video game. Here are some notes from Hidden Palace about it. For our third release, Sega Saturno is proud to present a never-released game of the main man. The famous interstellar biker and bounty hunter, Lobo joins the fun in this one-on-one brawler, featuring rendered graphics and button mashing by Ocean Software's American division. Intended for release in 1996 on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, but canceled for both in a last-minute decision, now it's up to everyone to take part in this fighting frenzy set in the Lobo universe with a virtually completed build, which is probably what would have made it to stores had the game been released. The game is very similar to Killer Instinct, not only in the graphical department, but also on the side of combat basis and rules. Players have 3 life bars to beat their opponents instead of winning separated rounds. As a continuous bout, the match ends only when any of the characters deplete all of the opponent's 3 life bars. Several characters and game modes are present. Lobo has a specific solo venture in which he'll have to cross the universe looking for convicts of the likes of Kringle, Lou, Nitro, Shada, and Dox, which rate different cash rewards. All of these rival characters are also playable in the Versus Tournament and Practice modes, along with the main man himself. And, as you can see from my gameplay footage, this is pretty much as described. It's very Killer Instinct-esque. The combat is, as it was noted, 3 life bars that you have to deplete completely, each one resulting in your opponent being knocked down. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to move on to a different prototype here and give you something else to look at. Let's go with Akira. This one is a very recent release for Hidden Palace, having only come out on December 25th, 2019, and there are a lot of notes about this one, and they may be longer than the gameplay itself because there's not a lot to see here, so I'll keep it to the highlights. Approximately 65% of the ROM content can be accessed within the game. The other 35% is non-null data. Developed by Black Pearl Software in 1993, intended for release in 1995. A lot of the music cues are present in the sound test but unused by the game itself. None of the levels can be completed. You can go back to the level selected anytime by pressing start. The first level lacks enemies. Oh, that's for damn sure. You'll see that in a second. The game is prone to crashing on the starting area of level 2. The cutscene that plays before 1K and 1T is the same. There is no cutscene before 4. The game freezes on loading the 5th stage. So what we have here is a video game based on the cult classic anime Akira, but in a very incomplete form. As you can see here, I'm riding a motorcycle around the streets of Neo Tokyo. There's some nice parallax scrolling here, and it's got kind of a road rash thing going on where I would be able to bash enemies ahead of me, behind me, and to the side of me, but unfortunately they didn't have any enemies programmed into it yet, and there's nothing to really listen to. And eventually, I just tried letting the bike drift since I couldn't seem to speed up or slow down, and the bike doesn't even crash. It just hugs the edges. It swipes from one side to the other, but you never actually wipe out. So there is literally nothing to do here. And to be honest, I thought if this is this incomplete and it has this many crashes in it, I don't think I'm going to try any of the other levels. I think I'm just going to go on to another prototype, but I'm still impressed that this is in any kind of playable state and that it exists. The only other Akira prototypes I know of were for the Game Boy, and they were discovered a couple of years ago by a very well-known video game collector and preservationist who had eventually put them up for sale, and I hope they've been dumped since then, but I haven't kept track. So anyway, that's Akira. Let's move on to another prototype. This one's rather interesting. It is a prototype of a console-only sequel to Dragon's Lair called Dragon's Lair The Adventure Continues, made, as you can see, by Taito. So, what we have here is Dirk the Daring and a whole new adventure that's not animated by Don Bluth. I don't even know if he would have had any input into this version of the game other than licensing the character. There's not a whole lot of information about it on Hidden Palace. It says it was dumped by Mr. Mark 0673 from an EEPROM cartridge, and it's been owned by him since 2011, and that's really just about all that it says. So there are these snake-looking monsters that I can bash. I've got a timer telling me how long I have to complete the level. I've got items I can smash open and collect. The barrels and boxes don't seem to be destructible, and there are platforms that rise and lower, so we've got a traversable area with different kinds of ways to get up and down it, and you can fall off the bottom and die. So there is at least some amount of work that's already been put into this prototype to make it quasi-playable. It obviously needs more to be a fully finished game, but they've got definite elements of an interesting side-scrolling platforming Dirk the Daring type game here that I think, had it made it to a fully finished state, could have actually been something. It has all the elements. It's got good foreground and background details. Dirk looks acceptable compared to his cartoon counterpart. I think this shouldn't have been canceled. I wish I knew more about it other than the fact that this prototype exists and is available to play on Hidden Palace, but add in some music, add in some levels, add in some gameplay tips and a manual and a box. I think this really could have been a good one. Now, this next one actually did get released in a finished state, so what we have here is a prototype of Growl from August 26, 1991, with the quote, "appears to have been built a few months before the Japanese release." So let me tell you a little more about the Japanese release. Growl, known in Japan as Runark, is a belt-scrolling beat-em-up originally in arcades in 1990. Set in the early 20th century, the player controls a forest ranger who must protect the local wildlife from a group of evil poachers who are driving the animals to extinction. A home version was released for Mega Drive on November 1991. It was also included in the compilation Taito Legends 2 for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Microsoft Windows. Now, I have to admit, even though it's cartoony 16-bit violence, I was a little bit surprised at just how much there is in this belt-scrolling action game as it's been described on Wikipedia here. You've got guns, knives, rocket launchers, barrels that explode, dynamite. I mean, there's a whole lot of shit going on in this game. I'm kind of surprised I had never heard of it before playing this prototype. I kind of want to see how the finished game compares to it now, so I'm going to have to do some more research, but I'm amused that it's got a Double Dragon aesthetic to it where you can hit people, knock the weapons out of their hands, and then use their weapons against them. I did get some satisfaction out of taking out these poachers with a whip, Indiana Jones style. I think this is definitely the most fun of all of the prototypes I've played, and shows why this one actually made it to a finished state and was released as a game. The arcade source material that they based it on was obviously quite good. And at any point now, I expect Ryan Taylor will leave a comment saying, "Yeah, I played this one as a kid, it's great." You were lucky, my friend. You had a Genesis as a kid. I didn't have one till college, and by then, all I really knew was Sonic the Hedgehog and NHL 94. And as a college student, I didn't really have a whole bunch of money to go and check out a whole bunch of games, nor did I even have a store anywhere nearby that rented Genesis games. So as a college student, I just had what I had, and a lot of this stuff I didn't discover until years and years later when I became a collector. But anyway, Growl is a fun prototype, and I suspect an even better fully finished game, so let's just leave it there. Now, this next one did come out in Brazil in 1996 in a finished state, and was briefly available for people who had the Sega Channel and the Sega cable modem to play as a download to their cartridge, which meant it was only there for as long as you kept it there until you overrode it by something else. So this one basically didn't exist in a cartridge form except in Brazil, and a prototype that was owned by Kevtris. Yes, that same legendary Kevtris who has created FPGA and cores for some of your favorite retro gaming consoles. But let's not go into Kevtris history too much. Let's talk about what Nightmare Circus is. The story begins with a circus in the desert of Arizona. Opening night, the circus burned completely to the ground by a shady and villainous operator named the Jester, who intended to cash in on an insurance policy. Jester was convicted for the deaths of the victims, but before he was executed, Jester warned that the souls of his victims would be forever tormented. Many years later, a Native American named Raven, who lost relatives in the fire, goes to investigate the location where the circus was held and where supernatural events have been reported. Night comes, and suddenly there appears via the psi energy of the Jester a ghostly apparition of the destroyed circus. Now, that might be more interesting in the actual game, but in this prototype, you really can't do anything, so fuck it, we're moving on to Pugsley. What on earth is Pugsley? Well, he appears to be a walking nose with a nose who really likes apples. What? What in the hell even? And you can jump on these apples. You can apparently use them as platforms themselves. Let's see what the notes here read at Hidden Palace regarding Pugsley. Version 0.1 prototype. The ROM has been modified from the original due to a bug that caused it to not work. The ROM was released by means of a YouTube video. The ROM appears as a sequence of images with black and white squares that represent a bit. The ROM in this article was put together by Novadicious, Mr. Potato Badger, V0M, and the Stone Banana as a binary file so it can be downloaded. But there's really nothing to do in it, so we're moving on. And guess what we're moving on to? This will look very familiar. It's called Same, but guess what? I just recently played this game. That's right, if it looks familiar, this is Fire Shark. Other than the change of name, it appears to be almost the same game. So I'm just going to move on to a different prototype here. And let's take a look at the Flintstones. Meet the Flintstones. They're the modern Stone Age family. Here is a character that looks like John Goodman. And he fell right to his death. He's dead. And there's really not much to do here. I think all the enemies disappeared. Flintstones. Here's Fred Flintstone. He can run around and jump up. He can grab on ledges. And that's really all to do. Seriously, there's no more than that here. You can manipulate this boulder into this box to make a platform you can reach up. And you can run up here to the top of this series of prehistoric levels. And eventually you'll reach a dead end where it looks like you can jump all the way to a platform to the right, but you can never quite reach it, no matter how much of running start you get. And there's no way to pick up speed. I held down the A, B, C, X, Y, and Z, all trying to get a running start to jump a little further and maybe reach that platform on the other side. but I couldn't do it no matter what I tried. And if I didn't hit the jump early enough, I just fell off and fell back down. So there's not too much to this one, other than a creepily John Goodman looking sprite that runs around on the screen. So that's the Flintstones, and that's it for my look at prototypes from hiddenpalace.org this week, but we'll do this again sometime. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and as always, thanks for watching.